You're listening to the Jōrni Podcast. What if chasing happiness is the very thing keeping you from finding it? Find out more in today's episode. This episode contains adult subject matter and some listeners may be triggered by this content. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Jōrni Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. In this episode, we challenge the idea that chasing happiness is the key to a fulfilling life. Our guest explores how the relentless pursuit of happiness often leaves us feeling empty, disconnected, and searching for something more meaningful. Shawn Léon Nowotnik is an artist, author, filmmaker, and therapist living outside Chicago. After losing his son to suicide, he was compelled to reevaluate his own narrative and look at how loss, mental health, and addiction can affect every aspect of a person's life. He's developed holistic treatment programs and advocates for improved mental health and addiction disorder treatments, as well as researching, writing, and public speaking about addiction, community, mental health, narrative, and social issues. His new book is F Happiness: The Search for Meaning in a World Gone Mad Chasing Happiness. Let's meet Shawn Léon Nowotnik. Hi, Shawn. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because the happiness trap is such a fascinating concept. And I really look forward to exploring more in this episode because I think a lot of listeners can relate to all of what you'll be talking about. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my absolute pleasure. And would you like to start us off with maybe a little bit about yourself or the parts of your journey that you feel are relevant to what you're doing today and what we'll be talking about today, just so our listeners can get to know you a little bit?
Yeah, so I actually have a background that started as a blue-collar worker, and I was always a creative person, and I quickly went from that to Hollywood and worked there for 17 years. And everything was right in my world. I was working on record albums. I was promoting movies. I was working with celebrities. I had a really, really great life. The week that I was supposed to direct my first movie, I just signed the papers for it, and I lost my son to suicide. So my entire world flipped upside down. Now, it wasn't an immediate process, but of course, I went through the shoulda, woulda, couldas, the depression, just the emotional swings that go with something like that. And I realized that I needed to understand psychology more. Why does this happen? And how can I maybe stop this in the future for someone else? And eventually I found myself, well, I'm going to go back to school, study psychology, and I want to become a psychotherapist, which I am today. And then I decided, well, that's a good audience, and I think I'm doing really good work, but I want to reach a broader audience. And then I started writing books about self-help and psychology. And that's where I am today. So it was not an easy journey to get here. And I can't say that this was my intention in life. Life happened and I made the most of it. I'm grateful that I could turn something so tragic into something positive where I can help and save other lives.
Thank you for sharing that part of your journey with us. And I'm so very sorry to hear that and to learn about what happened because those are very, very difficult times. And even losing a friend to suicide is probably not even as impactful as losing a family member or your own child. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm very, very curious to hear about how you've been working with what happened in your books, for example, because I know that you have recently completed another book, and we will talk about that as well. Let us know what that book is called and what it is about and how you're working with those themes in the book.
This book is all about not chasing happiness. It's all about looking for meaning, as well as asking the reader. Unlike my other books, I don't tell the reader what to do. In my previous books, they were self-help. It's like, do A, B, C, and you will get these results. In this book, I'm really asking the reader to dig deep because I can't tell you what your authentic self is. I want you to question, are you living the most authentic life possible? Moreover, what is your narrative and why are you living the narrative you're living? And is it the best use of your time? Are you living a meaningful life? Because happiness is fleeting. Happiness is very momentary, but I think it's really important to focus on meaning because it transcends time. And I think that's the really important message I'm trying to get there, as well as life is all about the relationships we have. Even this right now is a relationship with you and with the listeners. And these relationships are what change the world. It lifts us all up. And if we don't know who our authentic self is and we don't know what our narrative is, it's really hard to be vulnerable. And when we're vulnerable with people, that's when the real magic happens, right? When we can be vulnerable. And you can't be vulnerable if you're not authentic. So that's what the book really focuses on. It's written in a funny and kind of snarky way, poking fun at happiness, which is really what we'll get into more about the happiness trap and consumerism and that kind of stuff, and saying how silly it is and how much is a waste of our time and energy, but also so that people aren't depressed trying to live up to that facade that they see on social media and other places and advertising and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I feel like finding meaning and discovering your authentic selves are two challenges that can be extremely difficult when we're looking at what's being thrown at us to go find your happiness, just realign with that happiness, and your life will be perfect. All your sorrows will go away. And that is, in a sense, very misleading because that's not really how it works. And even when people end up finding what they think is happiness, there usually is that disconnect exactly to what you were just saying. And then we realize, oh, this is not really what we were chasing. We kind of still feel exactly the same way. Tell us a little bit about this happiness trap and without being negative about happiness, because happiness in itself can be a good thing. But maybe the sense of happiness that we're being taught by society is not quite that fulfilling happiness that we are all chasing after.
Yeah, so one of the first things is really to take off the blinders, this idea of happiness. So to try to break free from the happiness trap, we need to recognize what it is. And that's the idea of the facade of happiness often manifests itself in unrealistic expectations. And where does this come from often? Again, from advertisers and social media. I hate to beat up on them, but that's true, right? So I look at it this way, and I tell people this all the time. Advertisers are these slick weasels who weave a magical tale about how using their products will change your life. Now, there are certainly great products, right? There's certain things that do enhance our life. I'm not saying everything is bad. There are a lot of wonderful products. There's a lot of good things, but their idea is it's a psychological war to convince you that you're not worthy. And the only way you can become worthy often is by buying their product or consuming whatever they're trying to sell, including their belief system. So we really need to get out of that. And when we do that, when we're just focused on happiness, we suppress other feelings. And part of the importance of life is the ups and downs, right? I mean, sun wouldn't be great if we didn't have night. And we need warm weather, we have rainy weather or cold weather. And that enhances life, the experience, right? Of course, we want to try to limit the suffering, but suffering is part of life as well because it makes us appreciate the really important things. And I think with getting away from the happiness trap is we recognize that to have a meaningful life may also cause some discomfort, recognizing who we are, even the things we need to improve on, and not being under this facade again that we should always be happy. Because when we do that, we look at other people and we say, well, why am I not as happy as them? That comparison, right? Instead of looking into ourselves, we're looking externally and saying, well, I would be happy if I had what they had on social media. I'd be happy if I just had the beautiful picture they had of their family. And we don't know if their family's even happy. I hope family's happy and having a meaningful life, but we put our best foot forward on social media, and that's not always the true story. It's just to understand that there's going to be ups and downs. And once we realize that, we could better manage our emotions and get the full range of emotions that make us human. This is what's so wonderful about it. So basically, it's what I'm saying in short is when we take off the blinders is the idea that we need to be happy all the time is just unrealistic. So if there's anything you walk away with from that, that's what it is. And the assumption that everyone else is happy and I'm not is also a wrong assumption because everyone is not happy and they're not happy all the time, even if they are happy. Like, I'm happy at this moment. This is fun being here. This is great. You're a great host, and I like what your audience believes in and what their hopes and aspirations are. But it's also meaningful. Otherwise, I wouldn't get up in the morning and do this because there's meaning. And another thing we have to do is, and I already kind of mentioned that, is so with getting out of the happiness trap is just breaking free of that consumerism. I don't think people realize the hold it has on us. And it's really kind of scary in the sense that this is not just one generation that's gone through this. This has been going on for millennia. But if we go back to like 1913, they made a reference in a comic about keeping up with the Joneses. And here we are 110 years later, and we're still keeping up with the Joneses. My parents were keeping up with the Joneses. My great-grandparents were keeping up with the Joneses. My generation's keeping up with the Joneses. The next one, hopefully, will to realize that this is a phenomena and we need to really pull back and ask why we're doing what we're doing. Again, and that's hard for a lot of people, is to realize that your sense of meaning is going to come intrinsically from yourself, not externally, and to stop looking for other people to find your barometer of what happiness or meaningfulness looks like. It's got to be a very unique journey, and your journey is really important, right? That's the wonderful thing is like, I really recommend to your listeners and to everybody that I deal with is like, find out who your authentic self is. Be different, embrace difference. Don't be different for the sake of being different, right? But embrace your difference. That's what changes the world. I mean, I look at early Walt Disney work and it's like he remortgaged his house and his car to fund a film. Like, that's different. Steve Jobs was different. Jonas Salk was different. I mean, this guy tested polio on himself, the vaccine. I'm not recommending people start to do tests like that on themselves, but these people thought differently and they truly believed in themselves. This was very intrinsic. They weren't looking at everyone else saying, well, what are they doing? So I should do. It's like, no, I know what I need to do and this is my path. So I think that's really important. One of the things we talked about just a little bit ago was when we talk about happiness and we talk about baseline. So another thing with the happiness trap is there's something called the hedonic treadmill. And it's this psychological phenomenon where we adapt to positive or negative life events and eventually return to our baseline level of happiness. It doesn't matter who you are. This is a psychological phenomenon. We're still studying it. We don't know it exactly, but we do know that no matter what we do, so getting that corner office, winning that Academy Award, going out and buying that new car, before that first car payment is written out, you've already lost that happiness from that car. You're back to your baseline. So why is this important to know? Well, one, we don't want to be stuck on the hedonic treadmill, right? Because a lot of people are stuck on there from consumerism or chasing goals where they think the finish line is the end all. And no, that's not life. Life is a journey. So we want to really focus on the journey, which is mindfulness, right? It's like, where am I right now? I'm enjoying it. Like, I'm enjoying this conversation right now. I'm not worried about what I'm doing later in the day. I'm not worried about tomorrow. I'm just here right now in the moment. This is awesome. I'm going to enjoy it and do what I can do. The other thing with the hedonic treadmill is this is why I kind of knock happiness, because happiness, you will always get back to your baseline. So how do you change your baseline? That's probably your next question. Well, I can tell by looking at you, that's your next question. Well, that's through meaning. So how do we have a really high baseline of contentment? Some people would call it happiness. I would say it's meaningfulness. Is do things in life which requires you being authentic, which requires you understanding who you are and where you need to be. Because when you're content in your life, these little changes of this moments of happiness or sadness, we quickly get back to our baseline. And our baseline is already really elevated because guess what? We're living a life of purpose. We're living a life that really makes us content and has meaning and transcends time and helps other people. So I think that's really important, is that we really need to step off of this hedonic treadmill, this very short-sighted thing. I'm guilty of it as well. I remember back in my Hollywood days, I was always thinking about like, oh, I need this accolade or I need to do XYZ. And it was all these short-term things. It's almost like running a marathon and just thinking about getting the ribbon at the end. It's like, what about the journey? What about the benefits of the fun training? Well, I hope it's fun if you're doing that kind of stuff and the training and just bettering yourself, right? It doesn't matter if you win or lose. And then when you're done with that race, what's the next journey? Because there's always another mountain to conquer, another race to run. So just enjoy the moment. Don't look at the finish line. That's not as important because we're going to, hopefully, unless you plan on ending that race, there's going to be another journey. There's going to be another thing to conquer. And that's awesome.
Yeah. So many things to unpack and what you just said. I love it.
Yeah. Oh, if you have any questions about it, yeah, go ahead and hit me with that. I think those are really key elements. And then again, I would go back to the authenticity thing. So why are we not authentic? That's probably something I should touch on is, so think about this. We are all taught from a young age. We go to school. Most of us have gone to school. Some of us are homeschooled, but most of us are in a school system. We're taught line up a certain way, walk a certain way, sit a certain way, raise your hand, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because it's probably polite to raise your hand before talking. But it's gotten to the point now where school systems not teach us how to think, but they tell us what to think. We walk out of here like little robots. And how are you going to be authentic when you're told to be like everyone else or to be somebody that you're not, right? And then that system as well, and I'm not beating up the education system here, it is what it is, but it just hasn't changed with the times because the school model we have now is based on factory workers, right? It's the concept of like, let's get everyone to line up, punch a time clock and follow these rules. And they come in at this time, they leave at this time. We're at a different place in the world, and it's really important that we treat people differently. And we all have different goals and different visions. And one of the things that the school system doesn't do, as well as a lot of people in life, and that's one of the things I touched base in the book as well, is that we have to accept mistakes, right? School is all about you get the gold star if you get the 100% or if you get the 90 or whatever the goal is, right? But we don't celebrate mistakes. And I'm not saying like hitting somebody else or something. That's not a mistake. That's just poor behavior. But I'm talking about, wow, you had a really great concept. It didn't work out, but I really appreciate your point of view because you were on to something. You're doing something different. And I hope you learned something from it, which the student probably did. And they will move on. And they will actually be more resilient than someone who's always had success. So they're actually growing through what would be looked at as a failure, which I would say is just a learning curve. And we don't celebrate that kind of stuff. It's like, nope, sorry, you get a 30%. We don't give them a grade and say, wow, that was a great concept. You were onto something. I like the way you think. It's logical. You didn't have the right answer, but you were onto something. You're different, and I'm going to celebrate that, right? We see this, which is really interesting, is we see this with a lot of autistic kids. It's like autism for some of them is a superpower because they think differently or they have different ways of seeing things. And man, I can tell you, I have some clients like when they're dialed into what their calling in life is or what they are really passionate about, they are unstoppable. Like it really is a superpower, whether it's coding or writing music or whatever it is. It's like, and that's what we should be celebrating, like that uniqueness, that difference. Like we're not all meant to go to a factory or we're not all meant to be math prodigies. We all have our different things. And it's sad because I think one of the things out there right now is the world's greatest singer, and of course that would be opinion based, but is probably never going to be known because they never gave it a chance, or they were never nurtured, or they were never told they were good enough and they gave up. The greatest pitcher in baseball out there is probably never going to play a game. There's just so many things like that. Maybe the greatest inventor right now is being discouraged or dissuaded from something that's very lofty that might change the world because it's so much safer to go into a different field. Because again, when we step away from this happiness trap is also again with authenticity and we look at what's internally important to us. And right now, society's markers for whether you're important or not is what is it? It's what's your job title and how much do you make? And it's usually how much you make first, because I don't care what your job title is. If you make a lot of money, you're important and you're good. You're a great person. And money's fine. It's a great tool. People want to send me some, I'll take it, but it's just a tool. but it is not the barometer of that you are a great person, that you're better than somebody else. It's just a barometer. What I tell my clients, well, I don't really tell them, I ask them to question why they do what they do. Because I have so many of them who are told who they ought to be. And at this point in their life, they're living a life that isn't the life they thought they were supposed to live. And there's a disconnect. It's this really interesting dichotomy of like, well, I'm supposed to be happy and I guess I'm successful and I have a great career and everyone thinks that my job title's awesome, but I feel empty or I just feel like this is very arduous to go in every day and do this. And that's why I pose that question of what are your core values, right? So with your listeners, you want to know how to become authentic and what's important to you. Take out a journal or just a sheet of paper or use the notes app on your phone and write down your core values. A lot of people will struggle with this. Again, this is not what we're taught at school. What are your core values? Like, what's 2 + 2? How do you use a comma in a sentence? Which is important. I'm not knocking this again, but it's like we don't talk about important things like that. Like, who are you? Question who you are. How does this make you feel? And again, everything's not emotional, but I do believe in gut feelings, though, like gut instinct. If you feel something in your gut, I say go with it for the most part. But when we talk about authenticity, again, yeah, we got to really think about what moves us. So using core values is so important. I literally had a client last week where I gave them an assignment to say, like, during the week, I don't expect you to write all your core values, but write a few down. And they're like, I don't understand. I'm like, well, what are your core values? Like, right? Are you spiritual? Do you believe in health? And do you believe in servitude? What do you believe in? Because if you're following your core values, you're going to have a real quality life. You're going to be living authentically. And we don't take the time to do that. And we don't teach kids that. So I think that's really important. I'd say the other thing about the happiness trap is we really need to just chase meaning instead of happiness. Again, I'm not anti-happiness. Listen, my daughter said she loved me the other day. She hugged me. Not only did that make me happy, it also has deep meaning. I'm not going to knock that. I even like happiness like, oh, wow, you surprised me with ice cream. That's awesome. I'm not knocking that. That's a really awesome thing. I'm elated. I get ice cream. It's one of my favorite things on the planet. But to really search for meaning. So how do we differentiate, which I think would be an important thing to say here, is between happiness and meaning? Because I think a lot of people are confused and it's used interchangeably in society. So I always like to give this really simple example. It's kind of funny and it's kind of quirky, but everyone gets it when I'm done, provided they like pizza. So I'll use pizza as an example. Happiness is ordering a pizza. It shows up to your door in 30 minutes or less. You open the box, it's hot. The cheese isn't slid all over the place. It looks beautiful. It tastes beautiful. It's wonderful. But 30 minutes later, you're questioning what's for dessert and what you're going to watch on Netflix. It's very fleeting. Like, that was great, but now I'm on to the next thing, right? Where's dessert and what am I going to watch? Let's use pizza again as an example for meaningfulness. Now imagine that same exact pizza, the same exact outcomes with the pizza, but you're surrounded by close friends, your partner, your spouse, beloved coworkers, mentees or mentors, or whoever you have in your life that's important, and you're having deep, meaningful conversation. Now that's going to transcend time. See, that pizza, you're going to forget about it. Yeah, maybe next time you order pizza, you'll think, oh, it was really good. I'll order from them again. But that's fleeting. You're going to think about that conversation you had with these friends, and you're going to think about how they made you feel and how you made them feel, which is also very important, right? How do we make other people feel? And we're going to think about that a day later, a week later, a month later, a year, sometimes 10 years later. We won't remember the date, maybe not at the exact time, but we'll remember how they made us feel. And that's how it transcends time. And that's how I use the pizza as an example of happiness and meaningfulness. So they're really quite two different things. And we want meaning, right? We want longevity. We want to transcend time.
Yeah, that's a great example. I like that. And it also reminds me how important relationships are in life. And a lot of the lessons that I feel I've learned center around relationships and the loss of relationships that really brought me to understanding that difference that you just explained between happiness and meaning. Because relationships and how we make other people feel and how they make us feel, I think is a big puzzle piece of actually exploring meaning in our lives for ourselves. So thank you for touching on that. I think that's sort of one of these aha moments that listeners can also take away from this episode, is that difference in happiness and meaning, and maybe look out for that in their own lives as they're going through their day, they're going through their week, to really become aware of that difference between the two things and how those are playing out in their own lives. And with your experience and interest in psychology, I'm also curious about one more thing, and that is, where do you believe that this need for external validation and this external search comes from? You touched on the fact that we've been dealing with this for over 100 years now, and people keep falling back into that trap. Is it a lack of self-worth? Is it a fear? In your experience, what are we trying to actually address when we're looking at things outside of us to make us happy? What are we trying to fulfill, or what are we trying to band-aid when we do that? Is there something that's popped up in your practice or in your own life where you've maybe had a glimpse of what that is that we're actually trying to satisfy?
Yeah, thank you for asking. That's a really great question. Of course, there's numerous reasons why people do what they do, but I will say a big part of that is think about why we behave the way we do. And there's some great benefits, right? And it comes from tribalism. So if we think about really primitive times, we were part of a tribe, right? Fit in, do what you're supposed to, or someone's going to die. We're going to starve. We're not going to have fresh water. We're not going to have fire. It started very primitively. So we did have to fit in. It was absolute, or we just didn't survive, right? Well, now we have different types of tribes. They're social tribes. We not so much, and we have our immediate family and stuff like that, but it's not so much fit in or get out anymore. But to answer your question directly, and I'm glad you brought it up, was the main thing I think that people have with why they are not intrinsic with their happiness and they look externally is it comes from the fear of judgment. Again, some of this will be kind of what I talked about already, but I'll just kind of briefly touch base. I think, again, without beating people over the head about it, recognize the curated nature of social media. It's a facade. A lot of it's not real. So if you can start to separate yourself from that and limit your social media time, I think like podcasts are a great use of your time. But watching people trip someone down the stairs or just sing a silly song, that's okay just to laugh for a few minutes, but well, maybe not tripping them down the stairs, but that kind of stuff that you see on social media, there's probably a better use of your time, right? But especially if you are looking at other people and going, why do they have something that I don't have? And this makes me unhappy. So the other thing is practice self-compassion. The fear of judgment often stems from this harsh self-criticism when you make a mistake or feel inadequate. So we don't like to feel uncomfortable. So what do? I'm going to be like you, or I'm going to try to be like you, or I'm just going to agree with you, or I'm going to just assume I'm not as smart as you. So if you say this is how it is, okay, I want to be agreeable. So with self-compassion, the other part about that is, as I always tell people, is how would you treat a best friend? Because we are our own worst critics, right? I don't know about you, but sometimes in my mind, I'm like, Shawn, what the heck, man? Dial it down a little bit. You are so rough with yourself. There's times I look in the mirror, I'm like, oh gosh, dude, don't go out in public today. And that's not often, but we all have our bad days. Or I'll be like, wow, he's really screwed up that answer on a podcast. And it's just like, okay, well, there's two ways of looking at it. I can give myself grace and I can look at what I can improve, or I can just beat myself up. And what's the value of beating myself up? There's no learning from that. It's just, oh, I'm so bad, or I'm not. No, I'll try to improve. Well, that's all I can do is improve. So I tell people, treat yourself like you would treat a best friend or a loved one. We would never, ever talk to our friends or loved ones the way we talk to ourselves in our head. We wouldn't have any friends. Our family would never contact us either. They'd probably run the other direction. So just give yourself grace, practice self-compassion. And that's another thing that would be great to teach this at school. Learn to get in tune with yourself and give yourself some compassion. The next thing I'd say is challenge the idea of perfectionism. So the fear of judgment, right? The need to be perfect. We talked about this a little bit earlier. Embrace the idea that life isn't perfect. We're not perfect. It's not going to be perfect. How do we deal with it? And how do we move forward? And that's the really important thing, is to challenge that idea of perfectionism. So We talked about it in the school system, but now with your listeners, they adjust themselves. Like, hey, we should all aspire to be the best versions of ourselves, but also give yourself grace in that process that you're not perfect. Work towards it, what you see as a perfect being, but realize that it's going to be really hard to achieve that, and just be the best you can be. And as long as you treat people kindly, treat yourself kindly, improve the world, that's a win. That's a really big win. The other thing is, we talked about this briefly earlier too, is cultivate meaningful relationships. We don't have the fear of judgment as much if we have decent relationships in our life. So we talked earlier about the barometer of being on a hedonic treadmill and having this healthy barometer. So if we have meaningful relationships, we tend to be more secure in who we are, because guess what? Well, they like us, they love us, they flatter us, they give us words of affirmation, right? And again, we shouldn't just rely on external factors, but these are important external factors. They reassure us that, yes, we are doing something right, we are lovable, and that's great. So we know that we're not just narcissistic and assuming that we're great, like there's other people patting us on the back or giving us a hug. This is awesome. Meaningful relationships. And I feel like we've lost some of that with social media. As much as it's great, and I have people who have contacted me since my childhood, I'm very happy to see them. When they reach out on social media, I'm glad to hear they're doing well. But there's a lot of disconnect with it because we don't have enough of that in-person interaction or face-to-face. I would recommend to people, like, get on the phone, talk to people, FaceTime if you don't live close enough. Just make that visual contact. We're visual creatures. It really solidifies that relationship. And it not only will make you feel good, but it'll make the other person feel good, I'm sure. And I think that's really important. So meaningful relationships. Another one is develop a strong sense of self-worth. So build your self-esteem. Again, rather than relying on external factors, look at internally what you're doing right. You can make a list about what you do well and affirming your own values and abilities. Like I said earlier, with the core beliefs and stuff like that, your core beliefs, it's not for me to say they're wrong. They're your core beliefs. So believe in them. Have a strong sense of self-worth. And that's difficult for some people, many people actually, but that's really an important thing. And I think it's really freeing when we say, like, this is who I am and I accept that. And I think other people accept who I am. And this is great. Like, I'm living a very free life. I always tell people, if you're not living with a strong sense of self-worth, you're carrying around a backpack with a bunch of weight of emotions and other things that you don't really need. And it's a burden. And when you finally break that burden free or unharness yourself from that, it's like, wow, why didn't I do this sooner, right? Wow, I'm free. I was really controlling my own self in a negative way, and I have the power to break free. So I think that's really important. The last two things I would say is reframe the fear of judgment. So when we talk about fear of judgment is, and I mentioned this briefly earlier, is a lot of times people are just angry. So sometimes someone lashes out at us, or especially if anyone, I'm sure most of your listeners drive, someone cuts you off, they start screaming stuff at you, they stick their head out the window, blah, 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 blah. That's on them. That's not on you. Okay. That's not what I'm talking about when I say reframe the fear of judgment. That's just someone who's really not emotionally probably strong. They're having a rough day. There's something else going on in their life that has nothing to do with you. But please signal and don't cut people off. But public service message. But anyways, we all make mistakes. But so reframe the fear of judgment. How do we do that? So again, when I was saying, like, when I do podcasts, I often will fumble a word or make a mistake, or there's times someone's asked me a question. I say, you know what? I really don't have an answer for that. And that's hard to do. That's embarrassing because they're like, I thought you were an expert. Well, I guess I'm not an expert on everything. And instead of me going back and saying, well, Shawn, you're a loser, or God, you're so stupid, or I shouldn't do these anymore. This is why I shouldn't do it because, oh, remember how your stomach felt? You just felt your stomach drop. You don't want to feel that way. It's like, no, let's look at it constructively. What can I do differently? Okay, well, I can educate myself further on the topic, or I can practice my responses a little bit and make some notes and say, I have this, and learn from it. So constructive criticism, right? Learn to take constructive criticism and then separate that from people who are just irate. And there's a difference. And then last, and we talked about this before, and a lot of this overlaps, is celebrate your uniqueness. Again, I'm not knocking people who have purple hair, but I'm not talking about dyeing your hair purple and walking around with 15 piercings in your face, which is fine if that's your deal. But I'm talking about what makes you really unique as a human being and a caring person. Let the world know that, and don't be afraid of that. And don't let other people's negativity bring you down. Just keep living your best life. Again, core values. I think it's important also, as I mentioned, doing a list about core values is I'm a big believer in doing a goals list. I don't call it a dreams list because the difference between a dream and a goal is timeline and accountability. A goal, I can at least put a timeline. Was it a short-term goal? Is it a long-term goal? Is it a 5-year goal? Is it the next 3 months? And if we know what our core beliefs are and we know what our goals are, we are so much more likely to achieve them. So that could be spiritual goals, it could be emotional goals, it could be physical goals, it could be stuff that is all those kind of things that are best for our health. It could be even simple things like have some fun things on there. Like I can tell you right now without pulling out my goal list, there's 2 things on there that I should be embarrassed to say, but I will share them with the listeners is everything on my list is not these major things. Of course, I do have major things like finish my next book and get it to editing. Okay, that's really important. Or remodel the kitchen. Like this is not something I could do in a day. This is a many week project that I have to live in dust and noise. But I have fun things too, like and very easily. Well, I think they're easy. Probably not that easy or they wouldn't be on my list, but solve the Rubik's Cube. Just simple fun. I've never beaten that darn cube. Like, wow. The other thing is to tie a tie. You would think someone who's a psychotherapist because they think that we walk around in bow ties or ties, in our sweaters, which I'm wearing now, my Mr. Rogers sweater. I can't tie a tie. My truck driving brother-in-law ties my ties. He went to parochial school. He had to tie a tie every day. So all my ties are pre-tied. So on my list this year, that simple, fun goal is, again, embrace the differences in life is to learn to tie a tie. Everything doesn't have to be heavy. Everything doesn't have to be painful. It can be silly, fun things as well. So you can check them off your list. But we feel like we're moving forward and we're a better person for it. Again, like I said, everything doesn't have to be this arduous thing. Let's have some fun with it, right?
I love those goals. That is perfect. I'm sure every one of our listeners has something along those lines on their list, which might feel a little bit silly to them when they say them out loud, but they're these valid things that actually dial right into our authenticity and who we are. So those are great things to share. Thanks for exploring that concept with me about why we do the things that we do. That is a really interesting discussion, and I'm sure very helpful to people listening in, because once we have that awareness of why we tend to do things, we can actually start paying attention to it and make changes. So that I think is really, really valuable. Now, if our listeners are curious about everything that we've talked about, and maybe they're noticing some of those things in their own lives, and they would like to connect with you, how can they reach you, Shawn? And what kind of programs and services do you offer? And how could people work with you?
Okay, so the best way to get a hold of me, well, there's a few ways. One is to type in my name, and I'll spell it out because no one will be able to spell it based on what I say. So it's Shawn Léon Nowotnik, which is ShawnLeonNowotnik.com. That'll give you a little bit of my history from everything from Hollywood to what I'm doing with therapy to what I'm promoting as a movie and my up and coming books. You could type the same name in Facebook. It's a public page, and you could follow wonderful things like this podcast when it becomes available, or if it's live, I post that and people can follow that. My clinic's name is Blue Lavender Clinical in St. Charles, Illinois. So people can work with me there if they need psychotherapy. I do some really cool stuff. I have an amazing team of people. There's doctors there. There's everyone you could imagine there. We even have a massage therapist. So it's a really great holistic facility, and we don't do cookie cutter treatment. So we look at everyone as an individual, uniquely different. We are using psychotherapy and tested methods, but we don't just subscribe to everyone. This is what you need. We do some really cool experiential stuff. So we do sand tray therapy, we do EMDR, we do, of course, talk therapy, we do empty chair, which is union, and all gestalt, all different types of wonderful things. So people can get a hold of me there as well. And if I don't have an opening, I have just an amazing team that I know there would be a fit. So if someone's like, I really would prefer a woman, well, we'll connect you with that if you feel more comfortable with that, or someone who has a different specialty. So those are the best ways to get a hold of me. And then go to Amazon, please. Type in Shawn Léon Nowotnik. Find my book. So there's 4 of them out there. 2 of them are curated books of quotes that I use in group therapy and for individual therapy. And school teachers use it to have positive affirmations to teach different lessons. And then there's 2 books that I've written. One is Habits of Successful People, and the other one is about happiness and the search for meaning. And I think those would be great books for people. And I promise you, you will get something out of it. If not, get a hold of me and tell me what you didn't get out of it, because I would love to know. And I will try to improve myself, or I will try to work with you. Or maybe your book is just turned upside down and you need to turn it around and read it the other way. I don't know, but those are the best ways to find me.
Wonderful. And we will be linking to all of Shawn's offerings in the show notes as well. So be sure to check there. We'll also pop some links in there on how you can find his books. And of course, how you can connect if you'd like to work in therapy as well. I'm just going to remind our listeners here that we also have a podcast perks program where you can sign up with us for free, and any of the amazing offers and freebies that our guests give away during the show will be listed in there, and you'll have them all in one convenient place. So be sure to pop over to our podcast site and sign up for the podcast perks, and that way you can stay connected to the podcast, to our wonderful guests, and for a long time after the episode airs. And of course, that also goes for you, Shawn. We'll be putting your offerings in there as well, and our listeners can keep connecting with you. And this has been a wonderful time on the podcast, and I've learned so much today about my own happiness as well. And I do hope our listeners walk away with the same inspirational moments that I had during the episode, and many more things that they can apply in their own lives. Thank you so much for joining me today and spending your time with us. Thanks for being here, Shawn.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'm sorry if I was a little long-winded there. I don't think I gave you enough time to talk. You have such a wonderful voice and such a great perspective. So the only thing I regret is that I didn't give you more time to speak, because I think you have a lot of wonderful insights. So keep doing what you're doing, and I wish you the best of luck. And I'd like to consider you a friend from here on out.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shawn. And don't worry whatsoever, because our listeners get to hear a lot of me in every episode. So I'm sure that they're very glad for the change of scenery of hearing you. So not to worry about that whatsoever. And I do hope we get to do this again. Maybe when you write your next book, connect with me, let me know, and we'll have some more interesting things to share with our listeners. But thanks for coming on today, and take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a great day.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Jōrni Podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Jōrni on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejōrni.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.